a couple of slides. So the topic of the presentation and the keynote is sustainable management and perhaps some questions for the future. First, before I go in, I'm very grateful to be part of the conference, and I think it's my second or third time participating. And I really appreciate all of you, all of the participants of the conference and organizers of the conference. So thank you for inviting me, and especially I want to thank Liam Gaisin, the chairman, for inviting me, and hopefully my talk isn't going to be of anything controversial. But thank you very much. All the faults with the presentation are mine. So what is sustainable management? And there are lots of various definitions. One of the definitions by a respected Gartner firm is that sustainability management is a management discipline that embraces corporate strategies, operational capabilities, competencies, behaviors, cultures, focusing on products, services, enterprise, and supply chain, seeks to optimally balance organizational performance outcomes across economic, environments, and social criteria over all time scales. Another definition is by another university, and there are lots and lots of different definitions coming up, that sustainable management looks beyond short-term quarterly profits and focuses on long-term gain by incorporating the environmental and social costs of doing business into management decisions. And so the list of definitions can go on and on. Now, what is sustainable management? And when you start looking into the field, we've been in this field for about approximately 50, and I would probably guess more years. So started, as I understand, in the 1970s by environmental movements. In mid-70s, there were environmental surveys happening, what's happening with the environment. In the 80s, corporate social responsibility became a theme of that movement. In the 90s, the Harvard studies that linked environmental protection and competitive advantage. And today in 2024, here is the world today, and here we have the term sustainable management. So, so where is the world today? So actually, this is just a picture from, I think, last week. If you look at the beaches in the United States, and I'm not sure if it's a practice in Indonesia or in Thailand, they're filling up the beach with more sand by pumping it from the sea to avoid erosion. And as I understand, it's a practice that happens all over the United States. Now, when you, I don't know if it looks sustainable but you talk to people who actually were born there, the locals, they absolutely detest this practice because it destroys the ocean and destroys everything that's around them. And so sustainable management and the reality in which we live in this world, that perhaps no one truly cares about sustainability, corporate social responsibility, and there are lots of other ideas that sound good. If you look at the world today, and we live in this one big world, there's a concept called today called the doomsday clock. And I don't know if you're aware of it or not. So if you look at we've been the closest to midnight means final catastrophe, that the organized human life on the planet will no longer be sustainable. The world as we know of will cease. And so it's 90 seconds to midnight. If you look, when the world in 1953 was close to a nuclear crisis between the United States and former Soviet Union, was a major crisis. We were 2 minutes to midnight. Later on, we fell back, and eventually in 1994, we went to 90 seconds to midnight, closer and closer to the final. And the justification for that was in 2023 by the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientist. They cited unprecedented danger, war in Ukraine, and a major concern over climate change. That was last year. In 2024, the continuing war in Ukraine, between war in Gaza, and the fact that 2023 was the hottest year on record. And I can probably guess that 2024 now is going to be the hottest year on record. And we'll have to sort of see where it is. But climate fundamentally is something that approaches the entire planet toward a major catastrophe. And so this is the sort of reality versus good management, where about today we're 90 seconds to midnight. I think the bulletin of the atomic scientists is wrong, and it's off. It's most likely, I estimate that we're probably 60 seconds to midnight, that we're very close to um, an unspeakable event. We just survived one. So challenges today. If you look at that, how close we're to the final to the end of the planet, instead of solving the complex issue that the society is facing today, as scholars, most of us, for the past 50 years, we have engaged fundamentally in many interesting but they're useless discussions, watching the world slipping into a dangerous place. The reasons for that, I'm asking why. If in organizations I've encountered that there's a concept of double and multi-talk. I don't know if you're familiar with the concept of the double talk. Um, if you look at the fall, those of us who are slightly older, young folks, you probably won't remember that. The fall of the former Soviet Union, one of the reasons for the fall of that country was that everybody was engaged in superfluous double talk, fundamentally lying about the reality of the situation. Um, the whole values. So one of my colleagues I worked with in the Department of Defense recognized wall values versus real organizational values, and he often joked. And so, what are the wall values of the organizations? And these are some of the values that when you go through an organization, sort of plaques that posted on the wall. Actually, just found one of them. The core values that I found for $25.99 on Amazon. You can buy it by that particular brand. Discipline, determination. All of the organization post those types of things anywhere. Consistency, attitude, passion, and you can buy it on Amazon on any fashion you like. Now, if you look at the real values that, at least, and I'm not sure about Indonesia, in Thailand, Malaysia, but at least if you're residing in North America, this is the real values that most companies in the US have gone in the past 2 years. I don't know if you've ever followed Tesla or Elon Musk. He's disbanded his major layoffs at Tesla, disbanding major units. If you've heard of Twitter, firing everyone on Twitter. Amazon is laying off people left and right by putting them on a performance improvement plan, another sort of gimmick to get rid of people. And if you look at the biggest companies, Amazon laid off over 16,000 people, Google over 12,000, Microsoft around 12,000, Facebook over 10,000. And this is sort of the real values in which, at least in this part of the world in which we live. And hopefully it's not slightly different on your side of the world. Google continues laying off employees, moving them into, for example, other countries, Mexico and India. Now then, why is it that we say one thing, but the reality of the organization is fundamentally different? And there was an interesting study right after World War II, around 1960s, published by Stanley Milgram, called Obedience to Authority. And what you find is people in organization, at least in this part of the world, and I can assure you in many others, we tend to obey authority. And so the real core values of any organization that, at least of any hierarchical organization, most of them are being fully obedient to the boss, being always in full agreement with the boss, and you have to please the boss at all times. Um, it's called loyalty. Okay. If you look at organizations today worldwide, irrespective of the country, that most organizations today are fundamentally hierarchical. We're employed in roles. They have lots of different management levels, especially if you look at the world's largest organizations. And you will find the world's largest organizations in the largest countries in the world. So if you look at China, United States, Indonesia, Russia, and others, you will find organizations of the government. They will employ lots and lots of people, hundreds and thousands and more. Most of the appointments in our part of the world are very insecure. You serve on the pleasure of your boss. If the boss doesn't like you, you let go. Most people here derive only income from working in this entity. Typically, people spend about 40 to 80 hours a week in this entity with a lengthy commute, 5, 6 days a week with the technology, sometimes 7. And we spend about 60 years of the life in this organization. About 90% of the world population we sort of congregate in those entities to produce meaningful work, or we think so. If you look at this entity, actually, and I've done some studies and I've calculated, well, when you work in an organization, how much of productive work you actually do and how much of it is actually quite unproductive. And what you find is, at least I have found, that when I talk to people, most of the people are grossly underemployed and bored out of their mind in their roles, especially at the lower levels of the organization. And most of us are engaged in double talk, and fundamentally we're producing useless work that none of us believes that has any value to the organization, society, and actually creates the absolute opposite. And so what my proposition is that fundamentally in the world, many people in organizations today are depressed and sort of are in marasmus, wasting away. Most people in organizations are in fear, underemployed. Many of us doing absolutely absurd work. We're on the receiving side of double talk, meaning that we're being lied to. Um, and we actually, most of us understand when we're being lied to, and we pretend and engage in that interesting paradigm. We're passing depression is contagious. And if you wanted to collect the facts, at least in the United States, 70% of Americans, if not more, on prescription drugs, including for depression. A simple test you could do if, and I usually joke that if, how many of people who are working today, if they win a lottery, how many of them would remain in their working role? And if you would remain of that, how about your colleagues? So if your colleague won a lottery, would they be there tomorrow? And I can assure you, the majority of people I talk, you would actually, I would joke sometimes, you would see mass exodus from the organization, um, which is kind of a challenge that I think all of us as scholars will have to address. How do you work productively towards the future without sort of a stick hanging over your head? And I think it's possible. But if you look at the society sort of over the magnum view, that the way we live today actually is fundamentally very new, and it's also about to change. So if you look back at the 18th, 19th century, we lived in a completely fundamentally different world. So there is no Zoom, there is a candle, and you warm yourself up, through the fire. And then with the sort of invention of the electricity, oil, and gas, we've built those massive hierarchies. But tomorrow, within the next, hopefully sooner, we're moving in a fundamentally different world, developing nuclear fusion, discussing space travel, which is no longer, people don't look at you as crazy, but actually NASA investigated warp engines. Elon Musk every day talks about populating Mars and Moon, nanotechnology, magnetism, and all kinds of different new concepts that, and actually, I think you, especially kids who are in the universities today, inventing sort of stuff that we're not used to that. So world will change. Elon, and how is it going to change? Elon Musk, and today I think he's less popular than he used to. He was, but he comes up with absolutely fascinating sets of ideas. And so he's predicting that because of artificial intelligence, the robots who will be doing the majority of human of work that we now do, there will be not a universal basic income, which they've been done some experiments in the United States. So a family would be receiving a couple of $100 a month for a year. But he predicts a universally high income as jobs going to be replaced by AI. So it meaning that, and it's an interesting idea that you buy the society will guarantee you universally high income so that you could pursue your dreams, developing doing and devoting into anything that you want. There are some unsolved problems with that, and we can talk about that, but I think it's a fascinating idea that governments, I think, need to start looking forward. Another idea is that not just Musk but Jeff Bezos says that human population, there's an argument in this particular field. They say that if you look at Isaac Asimov, he says that the most prevailing idea that I've grown up with is that the world is overpopulated, which I sort of thought was so if we stay on the planet, there is nowhere to expand. But in fact, what they're saying is that our population isn't fundamentally big enough. If we had 1 trillion humans, we would have at any given time 1,000 Mozarts. And they're probably correct. We would have maybe hundreds of thousands of Mozarts, but they're a little bit off because I think there are thousands of Mozarts today, except that today they can't succeed because of the societal imposition that we have now. A Mozart born in Ukraine or a Mozart born in a authoritarian country which is raged by war can't fundamentally succeed. So there are other issues with this world. Isaac Asimov, fascinatingly. So another question I asked myself: do any of those talks make a difference? So in '82, when I was I was like very young, and I had no idea who he was. But he's predicted the future and actually quite accurately what we need to do with the society and the civilization. And all of the talks have fundamentally been discarded. What he talks about is that we need to move beyond the planetary Earth. We need to stop thinking about the fundamental issues that, for example, we have in a particular country. We can't think about what's happening in the United States right now, and I'm in Washington, D.C. What's happening in Washington, D.C.? Yeah, that's really important what's happening in Washington, D.C., but you have to have a planetary view. What's happening in Indonesia today, and that's one of his examples, concerns people who reside in North America. For example, if you cut the rainforest in Indonesia, here in the United States, we will have very little to breathe. So every problem that we have today is fundamentally a planetary problem. The explosion of a Fukushima reactor in Japan is a planetary problem. It's not a problem in Japan because radioactive particles washed up in Los Angeles. When Chernobyl blew up, apparently, and I was also very young, so I couldn't really appreciate it at that age. But if you look at the data, the cloud took the radiative cloud and moved it over United Kingdom, and so people who were at this time in Berlin, I'm hearing it from the United States military, have developed various cancers and died prematurely. The cloud. So any problem that we have today in any country, in Thailand, and Indonesia is a major country in the world, that happens in your country concerns everybody else. Now, another simple example I'll give you with the development of Zoom is a COVID. What happened in presumably China and however whatever it is, in irrespective of how it happened, it impacted the entire planet. So perhaps if we look at the world sort of going into the future, perhaps it's time to wake up. we no longer should talk about minutia issues that concern about a small organizational improvement, but we really need to take a planetary view. And um, by 2050, we need to sort of move into a coherent understanding that we need to live on it's a planetary civilization, and it's sometimes we need to live in some kind of a harmony with each other, and uh, perhaps with a universally high income, we need to somehow figure it out how we all of us, we don't have to like each other, but how we can all live together and share the planet and share the resources to move beyond. Because the planet actually, obviously discussed by many theorists, including Isaac Asimov, the planet has an expiration date. Our resources are finite on the planet. Um, by 2100, and Elon Musk wants to happen in the next 5 to 10 years, we need to become fundamentally a multiplanetary civilization. No, not all of us have to, let's say, have this conference on Mars, but I think there's got to be some kind of a settlement. There are people who would want to go and explore a new continent. There is a need for a base on the moon, on Mars, and sort of somehow have a multiplanetary presence. Another idea that Musk says, there are rocks flying in space. If one of the planets gets wiped out, the human species can continue. But we need to look beyond. We need to look, instead of fighting about who is going to take which part of Ukraine, perhaps it's time to think about how together, collectively, um, put all of the world, put resources together, and perhaps have a base on Mars. I think it's something that all of us can sort of talk together and sort of have somewhere uh, to look into the future. 2200, we certainly need to build an interstellar civilization. So with that raises a question, what should universities, and most of us are coming, what should we teach? We certainly should educate the world population so that the kids of the future could actually understand what's happening using AI and be able to calculate how to achieve developing new engines, new physics, new materials, and develop that world of the future. Perhaps it's enough of the, I think all of us should say, it's enough of the planetary threats, um, petty conflicts, and they really are very petty, organizational threats, and it's time to end the doomsday clock altogether, that all continuously shows into our face that we're 90 seconds to midnight. And so some of the questions that all of us should answer, um, we should figure out what the societal structure should be. How can a kid being born right now into the slums could actually have a universally high income and not worry about that if he or she, if mom or dad doesn't get a job, that they'll starve. We need to figure out another question of the structure and the organization of the future. It cannot be built on fear, which most organizations are built today. Let's please the boss, and God forbid, if the dean doesn't like me, I'm in trouble. We need to figure out the principles of the organizations of the future. What should it be like so that people could actually, instead of writing that silliest paper that I need to submit my annual report, I can actually spend a decade and figure out how to develop a particular good idea that will help the entire planet. Isaac Asimov talks about the world government. Perhaps it's time for us to organize in some kind of a um, way that we can manage and sort of work all together. Obviously, the United Nations experiment isn't working, as didn't work the League of Nations before the World War One. To We need to figure out how the multiplanetary government structure, and we need to fundamentally understand the understanding of the democracy, which the majority of, at least I don't really understand. What does it mean? What does a democracy mean, and how can you participate, and who could make which decisions? Obviously, electing a particular person in a very large country creates a problem that if a person goes crazy, you may end up with a complete mess. So what is democracy? And we need to figure out in such a way that it's possible for the full development and nurture of every single human being on the planet, and other questions that we will to be discovered as we go along this way. And I will end this on this sort of happy note that there's a bright future in front of us, but perhaps we need to sort of wake up and address some of the questions that all of us, I can assure you, sort of they've been lingering in our minds, and whether we're afraid of to bring that to discuss it, whether we cannot bring to discuss it, but it's time for the world to come together. Thank you very much.